to be talking about 100% web. So I got a picture of Tron up here because there's this kind of a holy grail concept about what 100% web is. But basically, when I tend to think of this, it has to do with you're actually hosting everything essentially off-site. Most people think of this as the cloud, but what we're really thinking about is more of an evolving paradigm, something that's constantly shifting and moving about. And this is present in everyday society through organizational and behavioral change. So in this kind of a concept, basically you have your social media type of ramifications. Let's say you think of all the different type of social media players out there. How does that affect the individual? Oftentimes I think that it affects them in a way that is something where they actually end up changing. It ends up permeating down to organizations. So let's take a look at some of the players. You've got Google, you've got Facebook, you've got Microsoft, Salesforce, Apple. All these different folks are working on innovating, but they're working on innovating in platforms that end up changing the way that people behave and think. This permeates right down to the enterprise because each of these individuals are actually looking at areas where they can push. Take evolving social media as an example. You've got Facebook, Twitter, Google+, these kinds of things that are happening, right? What that ends up doing is that pushes this kind of behavior into an organization, makes the organization actually think from an enterprise level. So you kind of think of more of like a Facebook kind of an organization or a Google Plus kind of an organization. Take these social video hangouts as an example. This is a way that as movements start to evolve, video conferencing can take place within a forum where multiple people are seen at the same time. It's a different shift, a different way of approaching where we need to go. So I tend to look at this as integrating circles and landscapes, right? So landscapes coming from more of a Facebook concept. Basically how that user interface, the concept of an intranet is geared around that individual. Circles with Google, rather you're rethinking your business model, rethinking it in a matter of circles instead of a linear path, moving to something like, let's say, Google Apps, for example, or you're looking at Microsoft 365, or something where you're looking at an evolving social platform, something that's actually evolving, forcing your users' behavior to evolve, bringing back that organization and behavioral change. Social platforms then become more of a key for us to consider, particularly as we're moving forward to talking with our executive leadership about how to make these movements forward. So how many folks here end up working with executive leadership, or they're a member of their executive leadership? I mean, usually you've got these really mellow guys right here and gals that you have to work with, and you have to put these ideas forward and how to sell and integrate with your clients, right? And I think that normally, usually, you can have the same experience. This is executive leadership, they usually end up leading with an even hand, right? I mean, it's something where it's a pretty mellow integration as far as the process goes for how you're going to be taking these ideas and pushing it forward. So trying to think of that, bringing how that's going to be something with, okay, we've got all these concepts we're going to be bringing forward. We want to integrate this with our clients. And you're thinking, okay, as I'm presenting this, what's going to be the response? What's the response that I'm going to get from my organization and from the clients? Oftentimes you can get intimidated and think more, okay, you know, is there going to be a measured response? Is there going to be a different kind of response behind that that's going to be inhibiting this type of behavioral change? And of course, there's always that concept that, I mean, really, I mean, you're going to get, people are going to be understanding if you make mistakes, or that your organization is going to be understanding if you make mistakes in moving towards this social media paradigm, or that social media itself and integrating to enterprise level applications is something that's going to take off. People worry about security and whatnot. So what my approach then is to say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to box them with buzzwords. That concept being that when you're approaching your leadership with these kind of things, talk about alternative fee arrangements. You're talking about legal project management. You're talking about these different kind of concepts that can essentially get them to a standpoint where we're thinking, okay, what you're talking about has direct business relations, right? So the thing is, if you can deliver on this, you're delivering on your victory by saying that, all right, I'm actually to get across these concepts of social media integration, of this concept of a business platform integration from 100% web, we're cutting costs, we're outsourcing as much as possible, bring all these things into play. It makes me think of a story that's put together by Kurt Vonnegut, or a concept put together by Kurt Vonnegut. Other than writing Slaughterhouse-Five, he put together a model for writing a story, a very successful story. And it was actually really simple, the concepts and ideas that he came up with. And I thought that this would actually be a good blueprint to end up working when selling a type of strategy for your firms and organizations. So I call it the Vonnegut Cinderella Story. And ended up doing the same thing. He was talking about you have your real life scenario, and when you talk about real life and you talk about these different goals, you're not going to exactly get to where you want to necessarily. But if you end up building up a set of expectations and leading up to that kind of expectations, you can be successful. So let's talk about our Cinderella story in this instance, okay? You have an organization, and you want to change the way that that organization behaves. You want to implement legal project management, all these different paradigms, but you want to do it in a manner that evolves as the industry evolves as Google competes with Microsoft, Microsoft competes with Apple. That brings into play these vendors you're looking at, that I look at essentially as the fairy godmother, so to speak. So you have these hosted vendors, you know they're going to be competing with each other and innovating with each other. Take a look at Google Apps and 365, how the two compete with each other. Take a look at how Facebook ends up integrating Bing and Skype in order to compete with Google+. You can implement these within your organizations with no infrastructure level cost. So I look at this as the slippers plus dress plus carriage. What does that end up meaning? So essentially, you end up putting in play, you've got the type of hosted innovation with one of these vendors. You're capitalizing on the concept that's going to continue evolving and moving forward. And in order to put forward with that, in order to move forward, you're going to end up with what I would call infinite happiness. In this case, of course, you have the fairy tale ending happily. You have your partners there swamped with cash. Your clients are completely happy with the experience here because with social media, you're actually bridging together the individual, you're bridging together them, and the way that they end up working the cases. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.